Welcome to another installment of the Fragments of Silicon review. This week we got two games. Um, Looks like it's going to be the last week with just two games for a bit. Like, as I mentioned previously, it's the busy season, so we've got a lot of looking forward and all that stuff. But, getting to this week, first up is The Inner World, The Last Windmonk. So, we'll just start on this. I know. About 6 months ago, maybe a little more, maybe a little less. I'm like, but thereabouts. We did a review on the first game. It's like it's a bit fuzzy at this point because it was 6 months ago and we review a lot of games. But I recall we generally liked the game. I thought it was a solid outing. A good adventure game. It wasn't doing anything innovative or special in terms of like mechanics or design, but it was a fair. Its execution was good. Its biggest selling point is its characters and especially its world, because the inner world isn't like. It's not standard fantasy or anything like that. You unless you played the previous game or this game, you haven't seen this world before. Now, it's a wholly unique entity in and of itself, is what I'm getting at, and that definitely carries forward into the sequel. Because honestly, I can sum this game up in a nutshell: more of the same.
Yeah, it's a very direct sequel. The tone and stuff is all pretty much the same. The plot progresses in a way that generally seems to be making sense.
Yeah, I'm like, it's what we would call like an expansion pack sequel, or something along those lines. Because if you played the first game, you played this one practically. Because I'll be honest, I'm trying to think of anything new this game does, really. Like,
aside from it's a new story,
right,
or an extension of the story.
Yeah, I mean it moves things forward narratively and stuff like that, but like mechanically, it's the exact same interface. I'm like, it's the point click, match the thing to the thing kind of puzzles. I mean, I suppose this time there are some variations in that. There are some more pure logic puzzles, I'd call them. Like chapter 3 and chapter 4 have like these big logic puzzles that if you don't use the hit guide, is actually going to take you a while to figure out.
Yeah.
I'm like, spoiler alert, I used the hint guide because, well, I had places to be.
Well, and the hint guide is fairly nice because it's sort of semi-in-universe logic of... It's not just tells you what to do next, or it's like you get 3 stages of hints, and it's sort of the way that they're phrased tells you how one follows from the next.
Right. Yeah. It's really handy when, you get stuck somewhere, and this will usually happen in an adventure game because, you can't quite piece together the logic. And, believe me, there were a few points where I broke down and used the guide, and I'm going, okay, how the fuck was I supposed to figure that out? It's like, okay, when you lay out the logic before me, I see what you were going for, but I'm like, that wasn't intuitive. And this is just kind of an occupational hazard of the genre in general.
Yeah.
Like, very rarely are adventure games bereft of logic. It's not the, match the random thing to the random thing. It's like there's usually a train of logic behind it. It's just sometimes it's not obvious.
Right. Like, how are you supposed to know that Pegasus got turned into a snake once or something like that?
Yeah, it's like you have to have some very esoteric knowledge is the answer. Like, I won't cite any actual examples in this game because, that's kind of the point. And I'm sure people will want to figure it out on their own. And if they don't, well, there's the hint guide.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, it was especially useful because we actually got this copy pre-release. So,
Yeah, there weren't guides yet.
yeah, I'm like, they literally didn't exist. And we've also played adventure games that didn't have guides pre-release, and got stuck there.
Mm-hmm.
Thimbleweed Park. Yeah, this is before they instituted the hint system or anything. So, oh hey, it's recapturing that old school adventure game experience. Didn't really miss that.
Oh, you mean the one where if you got stuck, you had to call the number in the manual?
Yeah. And the Thimbleweed Park replicated that exactly. Like, you actually do the number thing in game now. That wasn't the thing at launch or when we reviewed it.
Mm-hmm.
And like I said, anyway, this is very much a modern adventure game. It's still point and click, but not only does it have the hint guide, but it has the nice highlight feature. That's where if you hold the button outside of any of the clickable objects, it'll show you all of the clickable objects.
Which is convenient because some of them are not intuitive.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that helps reduce pixel hunting. In fact, pixel hunting is not an issue here because, it's all hotspots. And that is a pretty standard thing I've seen from modern point-and-click adventure games. And I'll be honest, I'm fine with it. It's like finding the one pixel you needed to find wasn't challenging. That was frustrating. Or if you want to frame it another way, it was artificial difficulty. Like, the challenge has to come from, successfully figuring out the puzzles, not figuring out where you need to put the object. Anyway, let's see. So the actual plot. Oh.
At the end of the last game,
Hang
off, if you haven't played,
hang on.
sorry,
Because I have to issue a spoiler warning. Okay.
right? I was interrupting myself for that. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm like, yeah. So, anyone who wants to play the first game, well, see, if you're listening live, obviously, it's a bit of an issue. But if you're listening to the recording here, just stop here, go play the first one, and then resume. This is a standard feature because from this point on, we will be talking about the end of the last game.
Yeah, and furthermore, I would actually recommend against playing this game without playing the first game first.
Right, because this is a direct continuation from the first game. So, Galax, you may continue.
I was going to say, at the end of the last game, you have pretty much saved the day from the megalomaniacal, obviously evil from the very beginning of the first game, Conroy. He ends up getting turned into stone by the monsters that turn people into stone, which turns out to kind of have been his fault. So,
right,
and then, of course, because Robert has like the world's worst luck, immediately after that, he gets turned to stone too. So the first puzzle in this game is having your pigeon friend turn you unstone.
Right. Well, it's also he got turned to stone because he was fleeing his responsibilities.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
He's a really meek soul who has a lifetime of trauma behind him. And
dealing with some pretty significant child abuse via neglect from.
Yeah. Well, Conroy becomes his like inner monologue in this game.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and it's actually something that doesn't go away. You know, bit of a
Yeah,
spoiler
it's
there.
still in this, and
But anyway, so in the king's absence, yeah, as it turns out, Conroy is the king of the flute noses and thus the king of Asposia.
Robert,
Like,
I mean.
he, he flees, and there's this new political movement called the Conroyalists, and every allusion to Nazism is purely intentional. Like,
Yep.
it's not subtle. Yeah. It's
Trust
like,
me, we've seen more subtle Nazis. These are not subtle Nazis.
no.
Yeah, and they're turning up all the flute noses and putting them in. Well, they're preparing to throw them all down the wind holes.
Yeah.
Yeah, sometimes some anvils need to be dropped, I suppose.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
And for those of you who don't really know, basically they're jettisoning them out into space. As far as
Except
this
that
world
space
goes.
is solid ground, yeah.
Yeah.
Asposia is kind of inside out. It's weird, and it's one of the nice things about the setting is that they kind of consider some of the implications of living in a hollow sphere inside a otherwise apparently solid Earth.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's also the Windmonks and the flute noses that they control the flow of air.
Yeah, and if they weren't bringing air into Asposia, presumably the bubble would collapse, and then there would just be solid Earth everywhere, and a lot of dead people.
Yeah. Well, they pretty much say getting rid of the flute noses is tantamount to, well, suicide, because they go, everyone suffocates.
Yep. Yeah, but of course this doesn't have anything to do with racist idiots who are looking for a bad guy who got rid of their, boss.
Their idol, really.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And of course, there's a lot of allusions to present day. Probably not intentionally, given how long this game has been in development, but much like Wolfenstein 2, the marketing department certainly noticed.
Another game with a marketing team fucking on point.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's like, the PR letter I got for this game was "Make Asposia Great Again." I'm like, yeah. Here's a hint: if you're using that tagline, you're making some direct political connections.
Yeah, you know exactly what you're doing.
Yeah, it's just this game is a independently developed adventure game from Germany.
Mm-hmm.
It's got a lot less attention on it than the AAA first-person shooter from a long and storied legacy of Nazi killing first-person shooters.
Mm-hmm.
And indeed, this game just came out a couple days ago, if I'm remembering correctly. Friday, yes. So, anyway, so you once again play as Robert and Julia. Like, you get to play her more this time around. Like, I believe she was playable for a chapter in the first game.
Yeah, it was one of the earlier chapters, I believe.
Yeah, and also this time you get to play as the pigeon Peck, and he factors into puzzle solving as well.
Mm-hmm.
Probably.
For example, there are many things that he can reach because he has wings.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But there are also many things he cannot do because he does not have thumbs.
Yeah, it's probably the biggest change up puzzle and mechanics wise, because otherwise, like, this game is really, really like the first game in just everything, mechanics, design. I'm like, narrative structure. And it's safe to say if you were a fan of the first game, you're going to be a fan of this one.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it's like neophytes should absolutely play the first game first, because honestly, this is like the second part of a story. versus like a standalone game that has connections to other games.
Yeah, the biggest thing about this series is its story, so you want to get it in the right order.
Yeah.
I mean, this series does give you, or this game does give you background when you need it, but you'll have a better experience if you actually play the other one first.
Right. And hell, even some of the music's the same. Like the music that plays on the menu screen, it's the same one from the first game.
Mm-hmm.
And none of this is a bad thing. It's just, I don't know. This is, how do I put this? This is pretty samey even for a sequel. And it's also, if you're looking for any kind of change up in the formula, yeah, that didn't happen. I'm like, and as far as a third installment goes, maybe it would happen. I'm like, but it's also, yeah, if they ended things here, it would be fine. Like, actually, like I said, it's I'm running out of things to talk about that don't go beneath not so much the surface but beneath spoilers.
Yeah, most of what the game is story. The physical gameplay mechanics are pretty simple, standard adventure game stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like I do think that speaking of story, this game did take into account the actual real world passage of time. Like, it's not like immediately after. It's 3 to 4 years later.
Yeah, Robert's been stoned for a few years.
Yeah, Emil's in charge and pretty much runs the place, that kind of thing. Julia's captured again, which happens a lot. Let's see. So price. So this one's a bit of a. I'm trying to think of the word here. A bit of a hard recommend, because the Interworld: The Last Windmonk on Steam is clocking in at $24.99. Like $25, and well, it's on sale now for $21.24. Like, let me see the bundle info. No, I'm not. Now, I can't see it because I already own both games. But presumably, there's about a $5 discount for both.
Mm-hmm.
Usually,
which is probably makes it a good deal, especially since you should want both games if you want one of them.
Yeah, I'll be honest. You should buy the bundle if you're buying this, because there's
probably a little on the expensive side, but I mean, you're in it for the story, so.
Yeah, it's like, and once again, I would not recommend playing this game before the first one. Like, it just doesn't work that way. But anyway, as far as the pricing goes, $25 is a bit much here. I'm like, it's got maybe the production values to sustain it, but I'll be honest, as far as adventure games go, it's pretty standard. Like, it's not that big. I'd say it's about as big as the first game, maybe a bit more. And once again, it does depend. It is dependent on if you use hints or not. Because if you use hints, you're going to blow through this a lot faster than if you don't.
Because you'll find, you'll know the solutions to everything and what to do in what order.
Yeah, and that's kind of the key of adventure games here, especially the first playthrough. I'm like, the challenge is in figuring out the puzzles, and like I have no problems using walkthroughs in adventure games I'm reviewing because, I want to get to the end. And I have no time to get stuck. It's, if I don't complete this game before this review, it's not getting completed. Or, it doesn't matter because, well, the deadline has passed. But, for people who buy this, they probably want to take as much time as they need to, figure out the solutions.
Uh-huh.
So,
especially because Robert does have, things to say about almost everything.
right. And, there are special achievements for doing certain actions. That's about the closest to extra rewards you get. That was another staple of adventure games back in the day, especially Sierra side. The then equivalent of achievements. You get a score, and just going through the game wouldn't necessarily give you the most score. That's about what's going on here. Because otherwise, there are no extras. There are no additions. And, replayability is about the same for your average adventure game. Which is to say, if you really, really like this, sure, go do it again. But you're probably playing this once and never again. Or you play it once and then you put it down for a few years until you've forgotten about it. That kind of deal. Let's see. Anything else you want to mention about the Inner World, The Last Windmonk?
Yeah, even if you wait for a sale, I do recommend playing this series just for the humor and interesting world setup and stuff like that.
Yeah. Any thoughts from you, Petty Fan, or Twilight?
It seems to be an alright game. I'm not much for adventure games though, so
Yeah.
They're pretty neat adventure games. I would recommend playing them.
All right. Yeah, that's about where I'd fall. Overall rating, giving a number score, about a 7, 8, maybe. That is if you played the first one. Otherwise, just don't even apply. For reasons previously stated.
Mm-hmm.
All right. I think that'll about do it for this review. Stay tuned. The Great Wobo Escape is up next. And I wish you good gaming and all that stuff.